So, on today's podcast, we are celebrating the year past and highlighting some of the great pod episodes and topics that have resonated with listeners, and hopefully giving you something to think about around the end of the year, maybe trigger some thinking and get you to go back and think about some of these topics that will carry with you into the year ahead. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the pod today, welcome back. So glad you are here. We are wrapping up season 7, which is hard to believe. Today, we are well over, I think we're close to like 220 episodes or something. I'm losing track now, but we're wrapping up and celebrating not only we're coming to the end of another year, but also just wrapping up season 7. So thank you to everybody who's been a listener, anybody who's been with us from the very beginning. So glad that this continues to add value and contribute to your life and work. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome in. So glad you're here. My promise to you is that this is a few minutes in your week, in your day, whatever your practice is, for you to step back, to think, and hopefully, have a little oxygen breathed into you and to think about the temperature that you're trying to set in your life and work. So glad that you are with us today. If you'll do me the quick favor before we dive into today's episode and just rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, leave an authentic review in your own words. Think about who you might share any of the topics, any different podcasts that have resonated with you. Share them with people on your team or throughout your network around this holiday season or whenever you're listening to this, just to kickstart some conversation. Those are all the ways in which these messages are amplified and spread, and I thank everybody that takes a time to do that, so thank you. So today is a rinse and repeat episode. We're going to be talking about and really cheersing to the past year that we've all just experienced together. And also, we've had so many great topics on this pod, and ones that I'm sure if you've been an avid listener that you will remember, and hopefully it'll trigger your thinking when I reference some of these. I'm going to just celebrate some of the pods that really jump out to me from this past year and some of the messages that have driven this podcast over the last year. And again, if you've been listening to them, hopefully that will trigger your thinking like, yeah, I want to go back and listen to that one again. And if you're new to the podcast, hopefully this is a little sample to you to give you some things to think about and to hear some of the trends or the highlights from the podcast. So, we know this, that we learn by remembering the path that we've walked and carrying that with us in the present moment, and then certainly, into the future. And with, well over 50 episodes alone just in this season, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I am going to highlight some of them that jumped out to me. So on today's podcast, we are celebrating the year past and highlighting some of the great pod episodes and topics that have resonated with listeners, and hopefully giving you something to think about around the end of the year, maybe trigger some thinking and get you to go back and think about some of these topics that will carry with you into the year ahead. But before we dive into today, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy, for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Okay, as promised, we're highlighting some episodes, some pods from this year that jumped out or were highly rated and or resonated with a lot of people that we heard from. One, I'll just celebrate this format of the micro podcasts. Again, all these pods, I'm always hoping that they are in that 50 to 25, 30-minute sweet spot. I want it to be digestible. I want them to be quick. I want them to be topics that you can quickly wrap your head around, but perfect for a walk or a commute or working out or however you consume podcasts. And so these micropods and some of the topics have been really well received in this last year. And as I looked at the 50 or so episodes just from this past year, which is a part of now we're close to 220 episodes. But as I look at just this past year, here were some of the themes and topics that jumped out to me. I started out the year by recognizing some leadership trends that places like the Harvard Business Review and Forbes and others were identifying for 2023. And we talked about what they're saying 2023 was going to be, and then my observations and my reflections on what I was experiencing within teams and organizations. But some of those trends of focusing on human well-being and creating psychological safety for teams and the people throughout an organization. They talked about one of the trends being designing for differences and being able to think differently about how we're hiring and onboarding and developing of people and culture and all that, which I absolutely agreed with. And then also just the recollection that, and I guess just being honest, that we're all still a little bit in recovery coming out of the pandemic and all the weirdo world that we've experienced over the last few years were some of the trends that the Harvard Business Review and Forbes were highlighting. And then I dove into my own reflections on those. And then I did individual episodes actually on each of those four areas that they identified. So you can check those out further if you want to dive back into those topics. But those trends actually remain true for the entire year. And from my perspective, again, culture continues to be the competitive advantage for every team and organization in the world that we're living in right now, especially with the shortage of staff, that the war for talent that everybody talks about. The culture that you create and the culture that retains the best talent, attracts the best talent, and then develops the best talent are the cultures that are creating that competitive advantage. I love the episode that I talked about defining winning cultures. And, that phrase or that winning culture shows up on my latest book, Breathing Oxygen, in the subtitle. But winning cultures is not just about the scoreboard. And I talk on that pod about results absolutely matter. I mean, they matter in our relationships, they matter in our teams, and certainly in our companies and organizations. Results do matter. But is your culture authentic, real, genuine, caring, and is the ecosystem growing together? And that really was part of the defining characteristics of what I refer to as winning cultures. Yes, the scoreboard matters, but it's not just the scoreboard. A winning culture is that authenticity. Is it real, genuine, caring, growing together? I talked about another pod about cultural dissonance, and that's where when our actions and our words are not in alignment. And this is a struggle that many leaders and many teams and organizations have, and certainly an opportunity for many teams and organizations, and certainly as with all the companies and organizations that I've been lucky to support, to see that so much of the great progress that can be made is closing that gap when we sense cultural dissonance is happening, closing the gap between our actions and our words and making them closer in alignment with each other. I highlighted in another pod about supporting emerging leaders, and I talked about my focus and attention in that with many teams and organizations, how important I believe that to be is identifying and then having an intentional plan that continues to develop people authentically for that culture that you're trying to create and to help support them. So, those were some of the ones that jumped out at me, and some of my favorite topics, actually, even beyond those throughout the year that jumped out to me as I looked at the list of 50 some that just came in the last year. The podcast I did about the imprisoned mind, where I shared about my experience of visiting Derek, that's the name I call him to protect his name, but who I'm visiting him on death row. And then the reflections that it's made me think about, and I shared with the audience of just any of the listeners to talk about that we're all really imprisoned by something. And so what are those mental bars, and how are we imprisoned mentally and with our mindset, and how does that play out in our lives and our work? I loved the pod that we did about, mentionable becomes more manageable. This has been a hugely important topic and popular within many of the teams and organizations that I'm serving. But are we making the things that we really need to talk about mentionable, or are we sweeping them under the rug? And then when we do make them mentionable, they become more manageable. So how do we make things we need to talk about more mentionable? I love the idea about cultural fitness, and the pod that I did talking about, we got to move the dialogue beyond just cultural fit. Cultural fit is a really important thing. Does the person you're hiring, are they going to be a good fit to your culture? And by fit, meaning not just to duplicate what you do, but they're going to bring and make a contribution, a uniqueness, bring a different perspective that will help the overall fit and strength of the culture. But then it's not just about fit. It's about the ongoing cultural fitness and development of the culture. I loved that topic, and that really got a great response. Some of the other ones, the interview and the chat that I did with my great friend and researcher Tamara Miles, in the episode talking about anti-toxic cultures, and we dove into research and talked about characteristics of really toxic cultures, and then what would it look like to be anti-toxic and to create a team and organization in that way. My chat with friend Doug Ullman, CEO of Pelotonia, and we're talking about the power of yet and the mindset around I haven't developed that yet. I haven't learned that yet. We haven't accomplished that yet. And the power of that kind of shift in mindset, really embracing a growth mindset. I love that conversation we had together. I love the one that I did about talking about seeking to understand before the need to be understood. The podcast I did about TGIF, truly genuine, impactful feedback. And most recently, the one I did about 5 stories that great cultures share. What are 5 perpetual stories that as you study and look at great cultures, what are the stories that the people throughout their ecosystem perpetuate and share with the people around them? So those are just some that I highlight as we end, this year. And there's certainly many, many, many more that I could sit here and talk about. But my hope is that this, reflection and quick remembering some of those topics causes you to say, hey, I want to go back and either dive back into one of those topics or man, I didn't hear that one. There's so much great stuff. I want to listen to it. I want to share it with my team. I want to get us talking and thinking about this together. So at the end of each year, also, I gather up, questions that listeners send in, and I want to just get to a couple of these as we wrap up another year together and before we launch into the next year. Some questions that have come in is people just asking some things, some logistical things like, hey, how's my new book, Breathing Oxygen, doing? How's it been received? I guess the simple response is really, really well. The launch was a huge success. I mean, there was a point where it reached number 1 on the new release on Amazon in many categories, especially organizational culture and learning. So, certainly to rise to that level of number 1, even if it's for a period of time, was a huge success for the launch of the book. And it continues to grow and spread, and the feedback has been exceptional. And as teams and organizations actually read the book and digest the book and then use the book and the questions at the the end of each chapter, it's really been fun to hear how the way the book, the messages, and the themes are adding value and making contributions to teams all over the place. So I hope that continues to happen, and I'm super proud and excited about the book. And if you haven't read it, I hope you will, and I hope you'll share it with the people around you. Another question that came in was just if I could only listen to one episode from the past season, which would be the one that I'd listen to. That's so hard. I just gave you a bunch of my favorites and just talked about that. But I love all the interviews and so many wonderful people and examples and great synergy of messages and people that inspire me and great examples of people doing work in organizations. I love anytime I have a chance to have a guest and around here, but I also really just love the micropod style of diving into a topic, even in a short way, and just giving people some things to think about. And so I guess the one that I just, again, think it's profound and it came back to my mind is the episode around the imprisoned mind. We're all imprisoned by something, but I tell the story again of visiting Derek on death row and just the feelings, the emotions, the reflections that it made me think about and really start thinking about how are we all imprisoned in some way, and what does it mean to see the real bars that might be in front of us, but also to acknowledge that there are some real fake bars that we put up around us, the things that we tell ourselves we can't do or we'd never learn how to do. And so breaking through those, I think, is a powerful idea, and seeing beyond the bars. So if you didn't listen to that one, that's what I would say. And then one of the last questions, or at least that I'm going to get to today, that came in, says, what are just my observations on the way that the work world is evolving, and how does the work that I'm doing play into that? And I just would quickly say again, and this has been kind of a mantra actually for the last couple of years, is really that this type of work, if you didn't think developing people and culture was important, then coming out of the pandemic and coming out of all the weirdo world that we've been in the last couple of years, you now do, and you see, and all the research points to, if you aren't actively developing people and culture and have a strategy to engage the minds and hearts of your people and bring them into participation in that culture, then they'll go somewhere else. They'll get disengaged. Like there's the war for talent. There's always another place to do that. So the places that are really authentic and genuine, it doesn't mean they're perfect, but they're rolling up their sleeves and saying, we need to create opportunities to engage the minds and hearts of our people, and really be strategic about how we're hiring and onboarding and developing emerging leaders, and what's the ongoing development and dialogue that we're having with our management team and our senior leadership team, and how are we culturally, like what are we specifically doing to bring that culture that we desire into action? Those are the places that, in my opinion, the results are following. There are a number of companies that I'm working with right now where their metrics and results on the level of their business and profitability, their turnover rates that have dropped way down below, industry standards, their ability in the midst of a war for talent to attract, and they're hiring more people than they ever have. The return on the investment of creating and developing people and culture is massive. And those places, the results follow when you truly honor this kind of work. And so I'm privileged to support and to be a part of that with the places that I am currently supporting, and certainly the ones that I know will come up along the way. So I hope this has been great. I say happy holidays to you. Cheers to you as you end the rest of this year. I hope you'll go back when you have some downtime, maybe as you're reflecting on the end of the year, listen to some of these and think about how it might help you in the year forward. Cheers to this past year, and here's to the future that's in front of us in the year ahead. I just encourage you again to remember that all of us, the future of leadership is you, as me, as us. We have a chance to set the temperature that we want in our life and our work, and then we have a chance to breathe good oxygen into ourselves and to the people around us. So step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.